coisa aprendemos este ano. Essencial são as pessoas e o que faz do mundo um lugar melhor para elas. A ENGIE, a maior empresa privada de energia do Brasil, trabalha nessa transformação, buscando fontes renováveis e ajudando empresas e cidades a consumirem menos. Este é o caminho para uma sociedade mais consciente. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Good morning. I am Rafael Bocio, the IR manager for ENGIE Energia. Welcome to our annual Investors Day event. All participants have their mics on mute. Through the webcast and YouTube, you will be able to submit your questions during the presentation. We will have 3 panels with pauses of 10 minutes. And during the Q&A session, participants can also pose their questions by phone. Before proceeding, we would like to clarify that all forward-looking statements made during this conference regarding the business outlook of the company should be treated as forecasts that depend on the country's macroeconomic conditions, on the regulation of the electric and gas sector, besides other variables. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Eduardo Satamini, the CEO and IRO. Mr. Satamini, you have the floor. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you very much for joining ENGIE in Inside ENGIE event. This is a virtual scenario, quite different to what we are used to, but this is what we have because of health and security reasons. Our specialist director will be here with you live from the TAG offices and from Florianopolis. We're following all the distance rules and to interact with you without the mask and with the necessary safety. We are all in individual rooms respecting the health protocols. We're going to begin with a retrospective of 2020. It was a special year with a great deal of learning and achievements. We begin by thanking our shareholders and stakeholders for the support and the understanding. We render essential services to society, and we were able to offer our best in highly challenging situations. But of all, we would like to thank our managers and our associates for their dedication and their efforts to maintain the operation and our projects in course. And the company has reinvented itself in terms of solidarity. We have helped a great deal in terms of volunteer work and collaboration. We would also like to highlight what has managed to maintain the balance in this scenario, in a scenario of drop of consumption and prices. Of course, we were faced by COVID-19 this year, and the GSF was also resolved very recently. And besides the concerns with lack of payment, once again, this was an enormous test and put to test the maturity of the sector. So in this retrospective of 2020, we will speak about our results. Despite all of the challenges, the company has been able to maintain its operation, and we continue on with our growth plans. We continue on with a comfortable liquidity to continue making investments to ensure the longevity of our company. And on this positive note, with the performance and the market outlook, with a improvement in demand, prices, and the control of inflation. We will now go on to the 3 panels that we have planned for you. We hope that this will be a moment of significant interaction on this platform as well as on YouTube. I will be participating in the conversation sessions, and our entire board is here to respond to your questions. Now, the electric sector is going through a moment of refinement with significant changes. We have the PLF, and in the House of Representatives, the 217. And we're now moving to changes in the gas sector. Now, our capital allocation historically shows how we have been performing in the company during the last few years. We want to ensure that our activities will be long lasting in a sustainable way and always contributing to the process of electrical transition, ensuring that we will have renewable energy in our generating parks. And to speak about our capital allocation strategy and how we want to continue to generate value, I would like to invite Guilherme Ferrari, Chief Officer for New Businesses, and Marcelo Malta, the Chief Financial Officer. You have the floor, Guilherme. Thank you. A good day to all of you, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this meeting with investors, which is very important to convey our perceptions in terms of relevant issues for the company. I would like to refer to some topics, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. The first point I would like to share with you refers to the strategic alignment. It is important to highlight and reinforce our full alignment with the holding company, the controlling company. We have enhanced our strategic alignment at ENGIE a few months ago with a focus on renewable energy. And as you well know, we have for some time already been investing in renewable energy, enabling us to grow organically through greenfields and wind projects, as well as some solar projects. And in the last years, as part of ENGIE, we have 1,200 megawatts, and we continue on with our efforts to keep growing in terms of renewable energy. A second important point refers to the low carbon energy, that search for the inclusion of this in our portfolio. As you know, we have already commissioned or decommissioned some of our thermal plants. We have a process that should return to the market in the coming cycle of Ute Pampa, and a plan for the decommissioning of Jorge Lacerda that will be further approached in our third panel. Another point that I deem to be very important in renewable energy is the opening that we have for the renovation of our concessions. Evidently, we are seeking the longevity of the company, continuity of our business, the continuity of dividend flows for the company, and our attention, therefore, is focused on potential opportunities with the renewal of concessions in hydroelectric plants in the coming years. Another very relevant points in our activity that is aligned with the definition of our holding company is our participation in energy infrastructure. We made our first movement in 2017 through the Gralha Azul auction, where we were granted the Gralha Azul tender. In terms of the transmission line, we also had a very significant movement at the beginning of this year with the acquisition of the Novo Estado project, reinforcing our stake in transmission lines. And another movement that took place in 2018 was the acquisition of TAG in 2018 to 19, once again strengthening our stake in the energy infrastructure. In terms of TAG, we will be speaking about this in greater detail in the second panel. Now, all of this acquisition of renewable energy and infrastructure are due to the quest that we have for perennial movements to maintain our dividend flow, and because of this, we also have to adopt certain stances and ensure that as part of our portfolio, we have very competitive projects in this very difficult, highly competitive market. And we're always seeking for alternatives, especially renewables in the free contracting market. In 2018, we worked with the Campo Largo 2 project that should be concluded the coming year, completely geared to the free contracting market. And we have another project, which is San Agustin, where we are at the final stage of approval once again. And we will implement this in a very short period to sell to our to our clients. This is a pillar in our strategy. I would now like to give the floor to Marcelo Malta, our Chief Financial Officer, to speak about this strategic alignment in terms of our financial uh, aspects. Marcelo Malta, you have the floor. Thank you, Guilherme. Good morning to all of you. When it comes to the strategic alignment in terms of our multiple projects, in the first place, we're considering the minimum return required by the group, and this requires a highly selective evaluation of the projects. Of course, we're always seeking the highest possible return for stakeholders. As reference in the last few years, our return on capital has been of approximately 20%. Secondly, we define our funding structure always in the quest for the most competitive prices, besides a duration that will be aligned with our investments. I would like to remind you that presently the nominal cost of our debt lies at approximately 7% a year, and the duration is of about 6 years. Finally, we always very carefully evaluate the decision for financial allocation of equity in projects. And as a reference in the last few years, and because of our low leverage, we have been able to structure our resource allocation and equity through the third party capital. Guilherme, I would like to return the floor after these initial comments. Thank you very much. Now, to continue on in terms of strategic alignment, a fundamental point is to have forecasts for our future cash through acquisition, through growth, or other organic growth. As I mentioned previously, we have some investments. We have some investments. We do apologize for that. We have organic growth that is beginning to show results in the company. Basically, our projects are under operation in terms of wind farms, and we have transmission projects that have financial revenues, and the accounting represents approximately 10% of our company. The M&As that we have done represent 20%. Jaguara, Miranda, and Itai, once again, very important for us. But we do see a considerable growth in terms of the renewable energy projects. And without a doubt, these figures will tend to increase with the coming into operation of Campo Largo 2 and the feasibility of Santo Agustin. Now, as we mentioned, besides the renewable energy, this points to our ability to grow in that field. And we're only able to do this because we have some projects in portfolio. We have a very robust project portfolio. We're always seeking for synergy, enhancing the wind farm capacity as well as solar energy. And we have to be prepared for this and to be able to have a good management of portfolio, risk mitigation, and hourly profit and loss. And all of this will enable us to continue to grow in terms of renewable projects in the coming years. It's also important to mention that all of our projects are aligned with the 998 regulation, and we're attempting to speed up our development projects so that we can have some projects with the benefits of tariff discounts. What is important for the market is that we reach our end consumer. Another important point to continue on with our future cash generation lies in the transmission projects. We have robust investments that have been foreseen by the federal government. And of course, we will get ready to participate in those auctions. As we well know, they're highly competitive processes, and we ever more have less large lots, and these are the lots that we tend to focus on. But we seek to be prepared to be able to competitively participate in these auctions. And finally, when it comes to the future cash generation, as I mentioned, the business development team is extremely focused on M&As. Now, they're always an opportunity. They may materialize, and there is the opportunity in the renewal of concessions, which should take place in 2021. Foz de Areia, which is an asset that presently belongs to Copel. And if it is in the auction, we will definitely be analyzing this asset. Now, when it comes to cash generation, I would like to uh, ask him to speak about our indebtedness so that we can continue to grow in the greenfield projects and potential M&As that we will have in the future. Well, as I mentioned, we have continued on with these projects, and we continue with our projects that are presently underway, Campo Largo, Lago Azul, Novo Estado, as well as Santo Agustin. And as I mentioned previously, all of this is due to our financial discipline, the assessment of our projects, and this has contributed towards our cash generation as well as to our results. I would like to remind you that our EBITDA grew more than 20% in the last few years, and our operating cash generation has been consistent and growing. At present, we are at a level that is higher than 5 billion reais per year. Of course, this growth has also contributed to maintaining our rating. It is important to underscore that this rating has been kept during 9 consecutive years. Guilherme, I would once again like to return the floor to you. Thank you, Marcelo Malta. It's very important to also reinforce the risk management issue. When we took the decision to hold projects or to work with NMAs, the participation of the entire company, the entire technical body, and all of the areas in the company involved in this project had to grant us robustness and the guarantee that the providers that we were selecting would enable us to deliver the projects in the best way. and we wanted to ensure that the commercial conditions would be preserved. Presently, we have a matrix in the company where several areas participate, and we are able to have ever more uh, robust projects, and we are able to comply with what is in the business plan. Of course, all of this will depend on the selection of our vendors, our providers. We have very sound vendors that have been working with ENGIE Energia with an excellent track record, and we're seeking to strengthen these partnerships so that we can have a win-win game and where everybody can attain their goals once the projects have been implemented. An important point that I would like to reinforce is our expertise. Once again, we have an extremely sound team with highly qualified professionals that are following up on the implementation phase, not only at the site, but also through technical visits to the companies. And all of this has enabled us to have a very robust process during the implementation. All of this reinforced with safety teams that are highly dedicated and follow up on all of the indices and have worked preventively to ensure that we will not face major problems in terms of health and safety. Our company standards comply with the highest standards in these two fields. And of course, as I mentioned previously, risk management is also part of the portfolio management for ENGIE Energia, where we have a highly qualified team. And when we decide to enter into a wind project, a solar project, or the renewal of an electrical plant, we analyze the impact of this on our portfolio to ensure that we will have growing sustainability and growing opportunity for our results. The risk management, of course, permeates all of the financial issues, maintaining our rating. And I would once again like to give the floor to Marcelo Malta to speak about the NG Brazil Energia ratings. Okay, Guilherme, from the financial viewpoint, our risk management has, first of all, had the goal of guaranteeing the best funding structure for our projects. Of course, to be able to contribute to these projects, and we have to plan carefully to maintain our rating. It is also fundamental to maintain the appropriate balance of our leverage as well as the duration of our funding. Besides this, it is important to maintain an appropriate makeup of our debt based on the indices. And I remind you that at present, this makeup is 55% indexed to the IPCA, 20% to TLJP, TP, 15% to CDI, and 10% to prefixed rates. Very well, Guilherme. I will return the floor to you for your remarks on the environmental auditing of projects. Thank you, Malta. It is also important to underscore, and this is something that we value greatly, in the environmental and social area of the company, the ESG area. And it is fundamental that all of these issues be considered since the very beginning of the project, the greenfield projects that we hold. S- Uh, when we begin to conceive a project, our environmental team is also responsible for the social issues and the investments made. It participates actively, setting forth very robust plans so that we can be fully integrated into the communities where we are going to implement our projects. We carry out a series of funding. We have uh, careful attention when it comes to environmental issues. We carry out procedures that go beyond the legislation. And of course, we ensure that there is social attention in the communities, delivering to them whatever they need. Now, as an example, in one of the projects where we have the implementation, we have educational programs, we work with families, we work to be able to provide revenues and the well being of the communities. And besides this, when it comes to the operation, we carry out additional investments in social and environmental areas. And Luciani, further ahead, will be remarking on this in the third panel. Therefore, I would like to thank you for your attention. And once again, we will resume all of these points. I would now like to give the floor to Malta, who will once again speak about other issues in the financial area. Thank you, Guilherme. In terms of the fundraising in general, as I have already mentioned, we are able to take on debts at very attractive prices. Simply to remind you, in 2020, we were able to take more than 5 million reais in highly satisfactory conditions, despite the volatility and the turbulent moment in the economy. In our vision, these favorable conditions, first of all, are due to the soundness, the longevity of our business. Secondly, because we are able to maintain our AAA rating in a very positive fashion in our negotiation process. And finally, we believe that our leverage levels have also played in our favor. And I remind you that presently we have a net debt EBITDA ratio of 2 times or 3 times. To add to this, I would like to reinforce that the most restrictive field is 3 times our net debt EBITDA and 4 times our net debt EBITDA ratio. I would like to take this opportunity to mention that the IGPM variation has had a very negative impact on our financial results, and this because we have more than 3 billion reais in amounts payable in terms of the rights to a concession that are also indexed to the IGPM, and this has given way to a rise in our financial expenses without a cash impact, but presently it represents 500 million reais per year. On the other hand, we have a natural hedge from our energy sales contracts, also indexed to the IGPM. And to guarantee our cash position, these contracts have amounts that are much higher than these liabilities. Now, with this, we will be able to recover from this financial impact as we have a readjustment in our sales contract and we convert this into cash. When it comes to the maintenance of our AAA rating, I would like to mention three very significant parameters that hold up this rating. First of all, the preservation of our net debt EBITDA ratio at 3.5 times. As previously mentioned, this is equivalent to our most restrictive covenant. Secondly, the maintenance of our debt based on leverage and adjusted to operating cash of up to 4 times. We have this 2.5 ratio in this field. And finally, we have been able to preserve the ability to fund our projects through project finance. Now, if we take into account these parameters as well as others, we truly believe that it will be possible to maintain this rating. And finally, when it comes to the minimum payout of dividends, as you well know, our commitment with investors is of paying a minimum of 50% of our equity, always in accordance to our investment plan. And I would like to remind you that on several years, including the year 2016 to 2018, our payout was of 100%. And in 2019, our board of management had approved a 100% payout. Notwithstanding this, and in a prudent way, and because of the uncertainties due to the financial impacts of the pandemic, we have decided to preserve our cash and have reduced the payout to 75% in the first quarter.
And we have approved the payment of dividends of 55%. Very good. So currently, this critical moment of the pandemic has been overcome. We have a more predictable cash. It's also more balanced. And this may be a good factor for us to revisit our dividend payment strategy for this year. I conclude my presentation and I thank you all for your attention. Rafael, I will now invite you to share some guidelines on the Q&A for the session. It is conducted by me and by Guilherme. Thank you, Malta. We have some questions coming from the chat. He comments that we talked about next year's market, and are you trying to renovate this concession with the sales of a control to private agents? The interest of the company would be to buy the stake and be Copel's partner, or do you understand that the federal government is going to take away the concession? I think this question may be addressed to Guilherme. Well, Rafael, this is market information. We have the activities carried out by Copel so that it can keep its participation of 49%. As it was mentioned for the renovation of these concessions, we believe that for next year, Copel, along with the federal government, will go through this process. And within this context, we would be participating to be Copel's potential partner. Of course, we will have an auction. We'll analyze the positive and negative aspects, and if it's interesting, we will participate in this process. Rafael, could I add a little bit here, because the process is just beginning. Copel has not defined yet what it's going to do, and as far as I know, they have spoken to the market, but Copel is still trying to define what the best way to go is. We have some actions that must take place. We have Governor Bento Munoz. And so we're paying attention to this process, but it's in the very early stages. It is difficult to say what our strategy is going to be. We understand that Copel is an excellent partner if it defines a methodology for the partnership of the mill. We have the same process that we have in Rio, but we would have some advantage in the process. I would quickly like to talk about the Malta process. And Guilherme talked about it, about the capital allocation process and the importance of this process and how it is done here in the company, starting with a strategic discussion with the controller, the financial discipline, the involvement of all of the different areas of the company in sharing knowledge and experience during the implementation process. And then in the end, as Malta mentioned, we have to take into account the dividend policy of the investments that are being made. We have to take into account our payout, and that goes back to our capacity. So this has been a process, and I would like to congratulate both for the wonderful job. I now return to Rafael for the Q&A. Thank you, Saramin. Second question comes from André Sampaio from Santander. Guilherme, this question is for you. You can start with the answer. What is the strategy to deal with these processes and not miss the benefit of incentivized energy? Well, Rafael, we have to accelerate according to our strategy. We're talking a lot about the free market, and we will have a window, as we mentioned before. So if we do not have any changes by September next year, we have to start doing it. And we will have 48 months after that to start operating. So with that, we would have until 2024. We are already starting the procedures at NIL so that we have this right. And basically, we will have a few projects over the next year so that we can accelerate. Of course, it's not only regulatory issues. We have some equipment limitations. We do not have any limitations to the capacity of the sector to provide equipment. And therefore, we will conciliate regulatory issues, market issues, and we will also verify the capacity of the investors to deliver so that we can access the maintenance of this benefit the best way possible for all of our projects. Thank you, Guilherme. We have another question from Andre, Santander. It's regarding Santo Agostinho. The project totals 800 megawatts of installed capacity, and he wants to know how the company intends to implement this project. Are we going to have any scale up? This is a good question. The strategy, as I mentioned before, is for us to try to have larger projects so that we can have synergism among the different phases. It is very difficult for us to carry out a project like this at once. We will conclude the first phase of the project with about 420 megawatts. And then we will see the opportunities for us to have the second or third phase of the project. It is phased. The second phase ends up having additional benefits. Part of the structure is shared with lower costs for the subsequent phases. Thank you, Guilherme. So we now have a question from Maria Carolina Carneiro from Credit Suisse. You mentioned the decarbonization strategy and it's going on. Can you update the sales process of the thermoelectric plants? Are there any news? Regarding Pampa, we are concluding some adjustments. Definitely next year we will come back with this process. For Jorge Lacerda, we already have a plan. The plan is coordinated by one of our directors. We're looking for alternatives. We do not have a solution, but we're looking for solutions. I will add something. Actually, as Guilherme mentioned, we had a long process, a 10-year process with our accountant. We could not find a balance between return and risk for the sales of the asset, and therefore we decided to form a work group to start working with the government, trying to find solutions for that asset or eventually close it in the near future. We have to define our schedule. We are suggesting 2025 to the government. If we cannot find another destination for this asset, we will close Jorge Lacerda. And the idea would be to start with some machines that have something to add. We have Jorge Lacerda A, which could have been closed. They add very little. And then we would close Jorge Lacerda A, which is the oldest one from 1965 until 2023. And then we have Jorge Lacerda B and C by 2025. Jorge Lacerda B and C would be able to take care of our coal quota. But, of course, if we have a solution, a better solution for the society and the economic activity of the state and the employees, we are willing to revisit this plan for the phasing or phased discontinuation of the plant. We were having private discussions in the past, and we will now open a discussion with the government to decide whether the social interest is greater than the economic interest of the plant. We have to define our basis, and this work is being done by a work group that was established specifically for this purpose here at the company. Thank you, Santantini and Guilherme. Our next question is from a physical person, Jose Rana Gomez. He wants to know if there are any metrics for the ROI in the greenfield and brownfield projects, or whether you cannot make a payout of 25%. Can you reduce this level so that you can make more investments depending on the opportunity? So actually we have two questions here, a metric and the possibility of having a lower payout than established by the the dividend payout policy. Well, I'm going to answer the first part and Malta will answer the second part. Regarding the metric, we haven't done anything because these are our own strategic issues. It depends on each project, each situation, and they can change. So we end up not using these references for strategic reasons. And so now regarding the payout, I will turn over to Malta. Regarding the payout, of course, it is defined according to our investment policy, the opportunities that we have, the greenfield project development activities, and eventually the purchase of assets. It's important to remind that over the history of the company, we were always able to keep our commitment with the market to pay 55%. And so I would say that only in very specific situations would we not use the 55% payout, which is our commitment with investors. Well, perhaps I can add something here to the first part of the question that was answered by Guilherme. Actually, our parameters and our metrics are a success factor. We have financial discipline when we define all of these return parameters. We compete for projects. We have a capex to be investigated every year. And so we need to compete for this capital. With that, we have a strong discipline and only accept projects that will have compatible profitability. This is one of the main advantages of being a company like we are, an international company investing worldwide, and we have to pursue this competitiveness. And regarding the dividend, as mentioned by Malta, we were always able to keep our commitment with the market of 55%. And we keep on growing. If we analyze what we do since the purchase of Zona Sul, we are the company that grew the most in terms of capacity, market value, profit. And so, with this dividend policy, which is generous and it's not usual in other segments, we do this because of the characteristic of our business, and somehow we pursue projects that have a high profitability. That also answers the question asked by our investor, and I thank you for this question. Thank you, Saramini. Next question is from Gabriel Francisco from XP. Saramini, could you comment about any updates on the negotiations for the Jirau transfer? Well, actually, we haven't had any discussions. We need to solve some structural problems for Jirau. It's no longer a project, it's an operational company. GSF ended up penalizing SBR. It is the company responsible for the Jirau plant, and so along with the partners, we are analyzing capital. We have a few things that will take place in the next few years, and we will talk about the possibility of bringing Jirau in. But keeping in mind that our transfer model includes only healthy assets. We are an open capital company. This is our vision. This is the vision of our controller. Thank you, Saramini. Next question is from Felipe Andreoli. In your opinion, is solar energy competitive enough to be commercialized in the free market as it's been done with wind energy? Yes. Felipe, yes. The solar source is the one that has gone through more significant technological evolution. We've had more efficiency gains, and also we have been able to decrease the cost, the manufacturing cost. And solar energy has been closer and closer than the wind projects in Brazil. I'm not taking into account the effects of time and other factors, but solar energy is getting closer to these projects, especially because the best wind projects have already been implemented, and the factor for the solar energy is kept at a certain level in Brazil, and therefore both sources end up becoming very similar, and solar energy is perhaps a little bit more competitive than wind energy. But I think that both will stay. We have a large portfolio of wind energy in Brazil, and the references I have for onshore is above 100 megawatts to be developed. And for solar, we have some capacity too. It is foreseeable that the offer of energy will grow for both sources in the upcoming years. Thank you, Guilherme. Next question, also from Felipe. He's asking us what the level of capex would be possible to practice, and if you can give us a reference. Well, Felipe, it is difficult to give a reference today. The market is very dynamic, and the prices of the solar equipment, and uh, also because of the pandemic, the costs have gone up. And if you want to buy panels in the market today from China, or our main provider, is 50% more expensive than what we had last year. There's a lot of volatility and also an impact on freight, which ends up making these solar panels more expensive. Our references are there for not constant. It's difficult to say figure. We could say 3 million megawatts. People, this is a reference that the market works with. A little bit more, a little bit less, but it is a reference. And this is what we see. We follow it. Thank you, Guilherme. We have another question from Marcelo Sari from Itaú. Since different companies will try to develop renewable projects and make use of the financial support, do you think that there will be an impact on the sales price of incentivized energy? Yes, of course, if we have a lot of offer for energy, and of course we'll have a price reduction in the beginning, but as the free market opens, we see that more and more clients will have access to this market, and certainly the renewable source with the subsidy will not be enough to meet the demand of the market. We may have some pressure initially, but then because of the amounts in the market, these numbers will grow. And an important aspect, as I mentioned, is that we will definitely have an offer of equipment which is not enough to meet the needs of all of the projects, and therefore the energy or the projects will be more expensive because the prices are also more expensive. Well, Guilherme, perhaps I can complement what you said. Marcelo, the prices were going down in general, especially because of this expectation that the subsidies would end. This is something that was anticipated for over 2 years. We've been discussing this already. The subsidies for renewable energy, which was very competitive, especially the wind energy, but we already had projects being developed, and this was making pressure on the equipment market, which has limited capacity, as Guilherme mentioned. So we may indeed have some effect on price, but most of it has already taken place. We can see it in the different offers for corporate PTAs that we end up competing with. We believe that it's not going to be a significant decrease or anything special happening because of this. But we have to pay a lot of attention. By September next year, we have to obtain the authorization. But then, if we do not implement anything, there is a guarantee that will be charged by ANEEL. We have to be careful, and the investors are careful. We're talking about 5% of the estimated capex. It's a relevant amount, and it is definitely higher than the amount once we discount the project fees, and therefore we will not advance too much. But yes, there will be some price competition, and we will try to capture projects where we will have an exemption of the fee or a reduction of the fee. But we cannot lose resources in face of the guarantee demanded by the regulating agency. Well, thank you, Saramini. Thank you, Guilherme. The next question is from Pedro Manfredini from Goldman Sachs. He asks about capital allocation and whether there is any preference of investments in any segment of the sectors, such as gas, solar energy, wind energy. In the case of these projects, there are risks adjusted for each one of them. Well, thank you for the question. Regarding the sources, the renewable sources, we try to be as competitive as possible to try to meet the objectives of the group. So regardless of the wind source and solar source, and the possibility of having the participation of hydroelectric plant concession, and I talked about this Malta Rainforest, that we will, without any prejudice, look for other sources. Regarding the energy structures, while opportunities come up, the transmission auctions are there, and we end up always analyzing it and carefully thinking of the risks, the return, so that we can add good projects so that they are long lasting and we continue this development process. So the project comes in, generates cash, and then the company continues growing sustainably over the next years. Yes, and perhaps I can add something here. In equal return conditions, if we are to analyze what is best for our business portfolio, it would be to grow a little bit more in terms of transmission and permission, and also in terms of generation, because we already have a very robust wind farm. We would like to have our solar energy grow, but we have to see what the best conditions of the market are. We have to pursue the best prices for our clients. As Guilherme mentioned, We are guided by return and what we can achieve for the next three pillars.
Thank you, Guilherme. Thank you, Satamini. The next question is from an individual investor. Engie, the controlling company, has reviewed its strategy at the beginning of the year. Will this compromise the Engie Brazil investments? Let me answer that one. As Guilherme mentioned, this review has opted for the development of renewable energy, which is our business. We want to reduce the carbon footprint and neutralize the carbon for our clients. So this brought our activity to a standstill in Brazil, but NG Brazil is fully aligned with the strategic goals of the group, and this was very relevant for the group strategy, the part that we have in terms of client solutions for cities, mobility, green mobility. That is to say, this is what the group is setting aside as a specific activity for sale. Now, for us, this has improved. It will release capital for investment in our core, which is renewable energy and energy infrastructure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Satamini. We would like to make an announcement. We have questions that we're going to leave for later as they refer to the commercial area and gas, and we will address those questions later during those panels. It makes more sense. We have a last question here in terms of which is our expectation in terms of competitiveness in the next transmission auction taking place next week. Well, Rafael, of course, we foresee significant competition. This is a relatively small auction if you compare it with previous auctions. We have only two lots, lot 1 and lot 2, that are of greater size. And certainly the greater players in the transmission sector will be focusing on those lots, and the smaller lots will go to smaller engineering companies, once again making it a very rough competition. What is positive about this auction was the change that ANEEL increased of not changing control until the commercial operation of these assets. So this has partially eliminated that speculative capital where there were a lot of players for the project. This was a very interesting point, but we do expect significant competition, especially because of the uncertainties. We continue to have significant volatility in the exchange rate and the price of steel, commodities, aluminum, which are, of course, significant components in the cost makeup. And what is also relevant, when ANEEL defined the capex for this auction, the situation was completely different. It was at the end of 2019, where we did not have the pandemic effect, we did not have commodity volatility and a stable exchange rate. So we expect that the capex of companies will be very similar to the ANEEL capex, and in some situations somewhat above, because of all of the issues of commodity volatility and the exchange rate. Thank you, Guilherme. In truth, we have a final question that came in from Marcelo Sá from Itaú Bank. He asks about alternatives for the debt Malta and what we consider to be more attractive in the market: debentures, banks, as we did with Novo Estado. Which are our alternatives? Malta, your microphone, please. I do apologize. The PR for the Novo Estado was an unheard of operation for us. The conditions were extremely interesting. We assessed the opportunity, we assessed some alternatives, and without a doubt, this ended up being the most appropriate one. Perhaps going forward, we will have as a source of funding the PRs. Now, debentures, we have been very successful in the issuance of debentures, and I remind you of the last issuance of Pampa Sul, where we had a demand 4 times the cost. And of course, the conditions were quite favorable. I would say that these are the sources that in our vision would end up being the most attractive and short-term resources, where we have also obtained a good cost in the loan operations 4331. Now, these operations have favored us, and they represent a source that we have used broadly. Of course, the funding from the BNDES and BASA historically have been quite attractive as well. But I would say presently that the PR and the debenture issuance end up competing in terms of rates and conditions with the BNDES. Thank you, Malta. And I would like to make a correction here. The question came from Marcelo Sandi from Perfil. 1 minute, please. We have received another question. A question that we will send to our next panel. With this, we would like to end the question and answer for this first panel. We will now have a 10-minute pause. Thank you very much for your participation and questions. We will meet again very soon. Thank you.
Como hino à alegria, eu crio. Como uma ode à vida, ilumino. Eu inspiro. Como uma sinfonia, eu afino. Respiro. Desacelero. Como uma nota que ressoa ao vento, que cai no chão, eu alimento, produzo a sua energia. Em harmonia, eu corro e abraço a sua vida. A ENGIE, maior empresa privada de energia do Brasil, se inspira na minha força para gerar e transmitir energia, transportar gás natural e oferecer soluções energéticas. Unimos esforços e criamos parcerias para um planeta mais sustentável. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Na vida, tudo tem começo, tudo tem fim. Mas no meio, tem que ter movimento. Em um momento como esse, em que um simples sair de casa é um risco, em que um descuido vira perigo, outros fazem por nós. Da semente que germina no campo, à entrega cuidadosa que chega à nossa porta, milhões de brasileiros diariamente doam o seu trabalho para que a gente possa, com proteção, seguir a vida. Do agricultor ao caminhoneiro, do frentista ao balconista, A toda essa gente que não deixa a roda parar de girar, nosso muito obrigado por esse movimento. Use máscaras, lave as mãos e agradeça. ENGIE, vamos além da energia. Para uns o copo está meio cheio, para outros meio vazio. Mas não dá para negar que mesmo no meio dessa pandemia, das inúmeras dificuldades, muita gente fez a diferença. Vizinhos juntaram cestas básicas, entidades reuniram doações, universidades desenvolveram respiradores, empresas doaram hospitais. E de repente, aquela generosidade do dia a dia, daquela vizinha que empresta uma xícara de açúcar, transforma-se em um novo caminho. E isso une. E mais que enxergar meio cheio ou meio vazio, a gente está aprendendo, juntos, a encher o copo. Use máscaras, lave as mãos e agradeça. ENGIE, vamos além da energia. Nunca o mundo precisou tanto de cuidado. Aquele cuidado quase maternal de insistir para levar o guarda-chuva transformou-se em colocar a máscara. Aquele cuidado de lavar as mãos antes do almoço virou lavar as mãos todas as horas. E nesse mundo cheio de cuidados, aqueles que cuidam silenciosamente e arriscam-se para que ninguém sofra. Um cuidado gigantesco, mas que, infelizmente, quase ninguém vê. Então, sabe qual é o nome de quem cuida da gente e a gente não vê? Anjo. Esse é o nosso agradecimento e respeito a todos os profissionais de saúde, esses anjos que cuidam diariamente para que a gente fique bem. Use máscaras, lave as mãos e agradeça. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Está tomando uma dimensão muito grande esse projeto, sabe? Realmente é um projeto transformador. Trazer conhecimento para a escola, traz pertencimento aos alunos. Fala, opa, é uma escola diferenciada.
A ENGIE nos ajudou muito e trouxe um efeito muito positivo dentro do projeto Gente e também dentro da sociedade.
E a gente agradece muito a ENGIE o investimento que eles fizeram aqui por acreditarem que essa ferramenta aqui iria ajudar tanto assim, não só Quedas, mas toda a região aqui no nosso entorno.
A ENGIE já foi parceira nossa, sentindo a necessidade de fazer a reforma dessa estrutura, que não é fácil pelo tamanho, fazer a manutenção, e com certeza estão fazendo a diferença no mundo.
Esse espaço do Centro Cultural, ele traz uma comodidade para a comunidade, que é colocar esses instrumentos num lugar só.
O Taekwondo começou aqui em Saudade do Iguaçu há 13 anos, né? Fui abençoado aí por ter empresas como a ENGIE, né, tão importantes assim, que cruzaram o nosso caminho e nos deram assim essa oportunidade de proporcionar às crianças e adolescentes algo que a gente não teve e que a gente julga tão importante, né, para o crescimento deles como atleta e como pessoa.
E hoje eu tô aí há 6 anos na seleção brasileira, eu tenho 21 ouros internacionais, eu tenho 7 medalhas internacionais, então eu me vejo daqui a 4 anos numa Olimpíada.
São 13 anos, né, que eu estou junto com a ENGIE, né, desenvolvendo ações em prol da responsabilidade social, da sustentabilidade. Eu agradeço todo dia.
O projeto Hospital Digital nos permite investimentos em tecnologia, inovação, imprescindíveis para que o Pequeno Príncipe possa fazer mais, melhor, tocar mais pessoas e ter resultados abrangendo todo o Brasil.
Visitando os agricultores, percebemos que a proteção de fontes seria um projeto que faria a diferença.
No total foram 350 nascentes protegidas com esse projeto em parceria com a ENGIE.
Muitas famílias que foram beneficiadas com esse projeto e não teria condição, acho, de comprar o material, de fazer a proteção que hoje tem ali, né?
De hoje a gente analisa e vê, assim, o resultado da proteção de fonte, que a água é bem mais limpa.
Não tem nem palavra, né? Sem água nós não somos nada.
É um projeto que segue, né, e que não para. A gente prova isso, né? O mais importante é saber que nossas crianças estão recebendo uma água de qualidade, né? A nossa família está recebendo uma água de maior qualidade, não somente na cidade, mas também no interior. Projeto que é uma planta de vários anos atrás e que segue para o futuro.
ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Uma coisa aprendemos este ano. Essencial são as pessoas e o que faz do mundo um lugar melhor para elas. A ENGIE, a maior empresa privada de energia do Brasil, trabalha nessa transformação, buscando fontes renováveis e ajudando empresas e cidades a consumirem menos. Este é o caminho para uma sociedade mais consciente. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Para cada pessoa existe um mundo girando à sua volta. E esses mundos não são medidos por metros ou quilômetros quadrados, muito menos limitados por fronteiras. São mundos próprios, do tamanho da prioridade e do sonho de cada um. E a ENGIE ajuda a girar muitos desses mundos, com incentivo e patrocínios de projetos socioambientais que despertam emoções e fazem a diferença na vida de todos que são beneficiados com esses projetos. Por trás de toda a emoção que a Camerata Florianópolis desperta em suas apresentações, está a nossa energia. Investir na cultura e no poder da música é acreditar que a trilha sonora das nossas vidas merece muitos aplausos. A nossa energia está por trás da disciplina, da garra e do suor das meninas do Leoas da Serra, time de futsal feminino campeão mundial. Um projeto social para mulheres e meninas guerreiras, vencedoras na vida. Investir no esporte é ver a nossa energia gerar sorrisos, gols e muitas vitórias. Toda a beleza, elegância e emoção da Escola do Teatro Bolshoi no Brasil, a única fora da Rússia, tem a nossa energia. Apoiar a cultura é acreditar que a magia que vem dos palcos tem o poder de transformar e encantar o mundo. Fomentar a cultura e o desenvolvimento das comunidades onde está inserida é ir além da energia. Por isso, a ENGIE acredita e incentiva projetos como os Centros de Cultura de Alto Bela Vista, de Capivari de Baixo e de Concórdia, que proporcionam um mundo de possibilidades, gerando orgulho a todos que estão à sua volta. Com o apoio ao Parque Estadual Fritz Plaumann e ao Parque Encantos do Sul, a ENGIE mostra que se preocupa com o futuro e o meio ambiente, proporcionando momentos de lazer e gerando sorrisos. Pensar no futuro é pensar no que está à nossa volta. E essa é a energia da ENGIE, uma energia que ajuda a girar o mundo da Marcela, o mundo do João, o mundo da Gabriela. ENGIE. Vamos além da energia.
Hello, good morning again. We're resuming for the second panel of Inside ENGIE 2020. I would like to remind those who wish to pose questions over the telephone. The number is 011-3127-4971. 011-3127-4971. Satamini, you have the floor. Very well. To continue on with our event, we're going to speak about gas, the outlook in the sector, and impacts. We held a very important event yesterday, which was the approval of the gas law in the Senate, of course, with some modifications made by the House of Representatives after a deliberation. And it is an important moment. It is the opening of the market with a moving away from Petrobras, enabling more room for other players, increasing competitiveness, and the opportunity of creating new business models. And speaking about this, the transportation sector, where TAG also operates, is fundamental for the development of the market. We would like to update you on the new design of the gas sector and the strategic role of TAG. For this, I invite Mr. Quintana, the regulator and operating TAG. A good day to all of you. Thank you, Satamini, for the opportunity to present the message from TAG. This presentation has been divided into two blocks. In the first block, I will speak about the performance of our operations, and in the second block, some aspects of the TAG vision in the new gas market, challenges and opportunities. Slide, please. I still do not see the slide. Well, I think we're having a few technological difficulties. We do apologize. We are trying to share with you the presentation by Mr. Quintana very well. In this first slide, I would like to remind you of some of the features of this asset. TAG is the greatest network in extension, 3,700 kilometers on the coast, and it is the network with the largest number of connections. We have two terminals of Enel connected, one in Bahia, another in Ceará, and we have the possibility of having a third connection in Sergipe with available infrastructure in the state. It still has not been connected to the network and will connect to the ASU network in Rio. We also have an onshore connection, which is very important in the northeast, and gas pressure in Cabiolas, which will also be part of this network. And the state of Sergipe also has a potential for offshore gas, which is significant. I do apologize about the delay. I still do not have the slide. Simply to highlight here that the acquisition of the 10%, which is the remaining installment in Petrobras in June, will make it the first 100% private transporter. And I underscore the expertise of the group in the international area in gas and gas transport, which is an important asset that we contribute with this new opening of gas in the market. I would like to highlight that the funding was based on the cash flow of the project. Now, the magnitude of this transaction shows the confidence of the large financial institutions in the development of gas in the Brazilian market. And the funding in dollars has a natural hedge of some of the transportation contracts, which made it feasible to set up this structure, and the debt in dollars is 100% hedged. Regarding the debt in reais pegged to the CDI, in 2020 it was below projections that we had for the CDI because of the accentuated drop, and therefore this poses a rather attractive scenario. Next, please. To the left, we have the list of the TAG contracts. This is a sound contractual position. And if we work on the average of the contract terms, the average is of 11 years. And I would like to show you the change in 2019 in terms of the contract with Manaus. In January, it was 6,286,000 meters. Increased somewhat. I also highlight the regulatory and legal safety based on shipper pay clauses and the readjustment based on Brazilian inflation and exchange rate. 6% of the index linked to IGPM, 19% to others, and a part to IPCA. Speak about the entry of new agents, we have two large windows. One before the contracts mature. The first matures in 2025, when we will initiate a cycle of tariff review, as we had with PBG. But before this, we are also working on the opportunity of the entry of new agents, and we live harmoniously with these legacy contracts. And I will refer to this more in the second block. Next slide, please. Regarding the financial aspects, I would like to highlight the payout of dividend for 12 months, 2.3 billion reais through the two payouts, and the close for the revenues of 2019 standing at 5.2 billion. And to the right, I would like to highlight the CAPEX for 2020 after almost 2 years without investments during the process and during the sale transaction for TAG. We had a significant recovery in 2020 where we made significant investments in the assets to guarantee the integrity, security, and the availability of the gas pipelines. All in accordance with our plan and budget. The investments were in equipment overhaul, the location where we have to care for some of the parts of the network to guarantee operational security in the project, the crossing of rivers, measurement systems, among others. For the next 5 years, we estimate something that is important. And once again, this is always linked to the regulatory approval and the approval by the market. I divide this in two broad blocks, one for maintenance, integrity, and the security of assets, and secondly, the preparation and support in preparation for the market. This includes the possibility of investments to expand some of the parts of the network or a new CTH. And if you put to 300, I'm sorry, we seem to have a microphone that is open. So to go on to the second block, we have investments in new pipelines, the terminal in Sergipe, another important investment, which is public information in the region of Bahia, where we have a pipeline for distribution in the west of Bahia, and the possibility of a new city gate to make it possible to transport to that network. And another very important thing is the investment in IT and platforms for public bids, a supervisory system, and all of this is part of the TAG plan when it does the takeover of the operations. Now, this is the package for the next 5 years, simply an estimate. Once again, it depends on the regulatory validation and some interactions with the market. And once again, it will work for the next 5 years. And some of the connections with Sergipe are part of the expansion plan for transportation. Next slide, please. Well, here I would like to highlight that throughout this year, we created our strategic goals and our mission and vision. The mission is to transport energy in a secure way for the sustainable development of gas in the market. And we would like to be protagonists in the transformation of the natural gas market and connected to energy. Next slide, please. I would like to highlight here that the year 2020 was very challenging for all. In our case, the challenge of the operation was 24/7 to guarantee continuity of the transportation operations as it is an essential activity and caring for the health and safety of all of our associates and partners. We also worked in terms of social activities in partnership with other companies. And I would like to thank all of you at TAG and the partners that day after day are part of the performance of safe and secure operations. Next slide, please. In the second block, I would like to present our vision regarding the new gas market and the role of TAG in this process. Next, please. Next slide. The TAG network is a strategic infrastructure for the domestic market, not only because of the active points in terms of gas, but also because of the characteristic that it has of operating in two directions, aiming to service the southeast area based on a good gas management throughout its network. And we also have an important role in the electrical sector of absorbing dispatch variations, offering greater flexibility. And as you will see on the slide, flexibility to work with the daily variations that are necessary in the gas market. The tag revenues are based on availability. Therefore, when they service these agents, we have ship per pay contracts. To the right, you see the high rate of contractual use of this network. And we have to avoid confusion in terms of numbers. 73.78 million is the sum of the tag contracts. Once again, this represents all the contracts. And each contract represents a physical part of the network. In the contracts, we also measure the average and maximum utilization. You can see this per day, and this is the consolidation of 1 day of operation throughout 2020. We have made measurements until October, 68.84, as you can see. And the availability and reliability of service to the market are essential to support the opening. Next slide, please. I would like to show you an example that illustrates the flexibility that we have. We are basing ourselves on the gas El Norte, as you can see here, and below you see the use between January 2019 and October of 2020. You can observe the high rate of utilization, and in some situations above the amount that has been contracted. This is possible in some market scenarios because capacity is a dynamic concept, and sometimes we have flows that interfere in the possibility of movement. And this is an example that shows the fluctuations and the very high level of contractual use of this specific segment. In the next slide, in both graphs, in the lower part, I show you an example of the behavior flow. To the left, a point of delivery, and at the right, a point of reception, and the intraday fluctuation during 24 hours. And to be able to give you more information, we oftentimes work on the averages of what is delivered to the market, and we try to avoid making mistakes in these calculations. And the fluctuation is between 0 and 70,000 cubic meters, and to the right, between 500 and 2.6 million. All of this in a 24-hour interval. And the network infrastructure has to be ready to absorb these fluctuations, which are necessary to comply with the market behavior, whether it is the thermoelectrical market or the industrial market or supply from the distributors. All possible planning has to be done to guarantee supply to the market, and we cannot speak about idleness comparing averages that are delivered to the market. Next slide, please.
I would now like to highlight what we see in terms of making access feasible to new agents, even before the public call, and you will probably frequently hear in the market. So whenever we have a public invitation, I would like to highlight that we are carrying out this process for a public invitation, but we're also meeting the needs of the agents in the long run. Highlight to the regulating agency in this discussion involving the stakeholders. We have the fertilizer plants that were rented during the process of divestments of Petrobras. So in the state of Bahia, we have access of TAG in the short term. We are trying to make this feasible. We also have public invitations coordinated by NTS. I would like to highlight that the transportation mesh is already connected in the case of TAG with NTS. In Cabiuna, we still do not have any physical interconnection. It is based on Petrobras facilities, but it's feasible. We're trying to implement an interconnection project to provide further flexibility to the market. I would also like to highlight Petrobras divestments. There are different ongoing processes along TAG's network, and it is an opportunity for the connection of new agents. We're talking about existing infrastructure whose owner is changing, but the importance of having new agents so that we can have a dynamic market. So we can have new agents coming in without any additional investments by TAG, whereas others will require some investments in infrastructures. We are paying attention to all of these needs, and because of PCC with TAG, PCC of Petrobras with CAD, and the fact that the gas is bought upstream, and we have existing gas already going through the mesh. They should be commercialized by these agents, and therefore we have a possibility of having access of new agents by means of the existing structure in terms of processing. Next slide. So here we have a message about the importance of the new regulatory framework with an integrated market where we can have access to the essential structure, guarantee the offer to the transportation system in an integrated manner. For a dynamic and sustainable market, it is essential that transportation by road, which is the main connection possibility here, can fulfill their role in an integrated manner in Brazil. And this is based on a coordinated infrastructure where we have engineering working in favor of the market to guarantee an integration instead of the isolation of the different regions. This is the way to go for us to have a dynamic and sustainable market. I highlight the opportunities for gas storage along TAG's mesh. We have some areas that could provide significant support to the opening of the market, providing flexibility to the offer in case of the gas, even though we may need some regularity in terms of the injection in the system, but it would provide upstream support to guarantee continued flow, and also in the role of the variations in the demand, and in our case, as opposed to Europe, we have important seasonality. And we also understand that the connection of all agents, the thermoelectric plants, the industrial market, all of this leads to a more dynamism, and also it guarantees more safety in terms of gas delivery. Next slide. On the right side, we have IPE's graph. It reinforces the role of gas as an important source in the evolution of the Brazilian energy matrix. We have a perspective of increased offer. It's important to monetize, regardless of the importance of the electric sector. It is important to increase other uses for gas, the use of fertilizers, refining, the petrochemical and ceramic sector, and load transportation. So it's important to foment a sustainable development, reinforcing on the left side the importance of promoting this virtuous circle with an integrated industry, with infrastructure, and as a final message, next slide, please. I would like to highlight the role of the transportation system. It is essential in the opening of natural gas in Brazil as the main pathway of the molecule that promotes the availability of the raw material integrated at a national level. We also have the role of the transportation in facilitating the activities of our agents with different actions. And I usually like to say that the market has changed. In the past, the agents bought a ready-made solution with a molecule at their doors. Today, they count on the possibility, and will continue to do so, of choosing the molecule provider where products will be chosen and the freight will be hired. Transportation represents this main pillar and guarantees the possibility of having better prices to the market. With distribution, we have the possibility to optimize, to have more volume in this infrastructure. With that, we have a scale gain and can provide better fees. With our transportation segment, increased revenues related to new investments. When we have more new agents, the fees will go down. It is related to new investments and also to operational efficiency gain and to some projects that may be developed once this new market is open. But basically, it is related to new investments in infrastructure. So helping the market growth, remove the sector from inertia. It's an important trigger to attract new investments. Satamini commented in his introduction about the law project, and yesterday it went to the Senate with some alterations. Some of them were not positive for the gas sector, but Preel's text was approved in the lower house, and it reflects the discussions we've been having, and we do support that tax as it was approved in the lower house because it's related to this concept of national integration and not in the formation of isolated clusters along the MASH. The sustainable development of the market of natural gas is important to attract new investments. I reinforce it is what we need to get the sector out of its inertia. I thank you for the time and opportunity, and am available to clarify any eventual questions during the Q&A. Thank you, video. We now turn over to Satamini. Satamini, would you like to make some comments? Yes, thank you, Ovidio. We do face a lot of expectation in the gas sector. It's very positive. The discussions on regulations remain. The approval by the Senate will resume the topics discussed in the lower house. We will have discussions again so that we can validate or not the changes. But the most important thing is that we will have more adequate regulations, and it will continue with regulations by ANP with a more dynamic market, which is closer to the market economy, including different stakeholders, improving competitiveness and opportunities. I'm going to invite Eduardo Takamori, our regulatory issues manager, so that he can talk a little bit about the integration between the gas and energy sector, what the expectations are by the generation company, which is our case, regarding this new regulatory framework that is being designed, and also the main concerns we have that we have worked with in our associations. Thank you, Satamini. Good morning, everyone. As Satamini and Ovidio have already said, the law project that was approved by the Senate is a hot topic right now in the energy and gas market. We had high expectations that the text would be approved exactly as it was approved in the lower house, but we understand that the text was prepared. It had gone through a lot of discussions. We were dealing with the changes in the Senate, but it is a relief for us that the senators rejected Article 41, which dealt on the inclusion of thermoelectric plants. And it's not because we want to prevent this from happening. We are convinced that we should deal with this technically at the level of the Mines and Energy Ministry, because they are the ones who will be able to evaluate all of the attributes that will guarantee the supply of energy to our society. And so in this regard, we really like the publication of the ministry regulation. This is something new in our sector. It has to do with technological improvement. We understand that we have a competition among the different sources, but we cannot limit the characteristics of a thermoelectric. The idea is that they should be welcomed in this environment of competition, but of course, it should win based on its economic value. One of the main difficulties to connect the sector, and this is in response to Satamini's comment, to put it simply, gas should be delivered constantly, but then on the other hand, consumer would like to have flexibility in this offer of gas. This is very important for the electric sector. the electric sector would like to use gas as a backup or only whenever required, if it's not sunny or if it's not windy. But eventually, we can improve this with implementation of gas storage infrastructure, which would allow us to have like a link between the offer of gas. And then also, I'd like to say that we need to develop other activities that will have better added value to our society. It goes from incentives to the petrochemical industry and or even gas liquefaction for export so that we can have an infinite access to the market. The idea is try to leave from that eternal problem that has to do with the egg and the chicken, which one comes first. We have offer available and we'll deal with the suppressed demand. Takamori, are there any mechanisms that may be created so that the gas consumer will pay for this flexibility or for this need to have further development in the gas sector? Because when you have the inflexible thermoelectrics, which are not competitive in the electric sector, the consumer is not consuming gas, but is paying this bill on behalf of the gas consumer. So how can we have a methodology that will enable the cost to fall for those who benefit from it? Well, for a policy that monetizes gas is very sensitive. It has to do with the money flow between the different segments. It's not obvious. Payers and beneficiaries are very different. The industrial policy could find other sources and other demands instead of believing on the easiest way to go for the thermoelectric sector. The idea is to allow it to go regardless of the demand, and our idea is to overcome the logic and take into account that thermoelectrics are welcome if they make sense. Regarding your question, there's no easy way to have this portability, to have this materialization of a policy to monetize gas in the electric sector, eventually by CDEs adjustments or an income flow capturing the gas sector, and maybe use CDE or any other possibility, but this is far from being easy to solve. That's why we always try to achieve novel opportunities and to have a more efficient market for the gas and electric sector. I have another question. What are the initiatives of the government regarding the development of other head consumers of gas so that we can have a more sustainable development of this resource, which is not being used right now in the Brazilian underwaters? So I would like to know whether there are any initiatives in this regard. Well, Tatamini, I would start by talking about the divestment process at Petrobras. In Bahia and Sergipe, they rented the fertilizers plants. We depend on imports that can and should be incentivized, but we are now seeing the rental of these plants that were hibernating, and it'll take place in the first quarter in Bahia and Sergipe. They will resume operations. They demand 1.5 or even 2 million cubic meters of gas per day. It's representative and equivalent to a 900 mega plant. We have to encourage transportation. There is a lot of opportunity to replace this matrix. There's also a very important environmental appeal. I understand that the refining sector in Brazil is the main consumer and should be encouraged as well. Well, so I think we can now move on to our Q&A session, and therefore I'd like to ask Rafael to coordinate this part. Right, Rafael? Okay, fine. I was wearing a mask out of habit. In fact, I didn't need to. So we now have some questions. I'm going to break a few of them into more because they have different sections. The first question is from Marcelo Sado from Itaú Bank. Urucum is being sold by Petrobras. Urucum today produces more gas than it sells because they have a problem in the pipeline. There are studies that say that with investments in compressors, the capacity could go from 6.7 million cubic meters per day to 9.5 million cubic meters per day. Would it make any sense for TAG to make this investment for expansion of TAG? What was decided at a regulatory level as to the return level? Well, conceptually speaking, any eventual need of the market is a good problem for the infrastructure sector. Expansion with an economic rationale, as Sakamori mentioned, has to do with our business. In the case of Manaus, we have a logistic challenge. The production is in the Urucu region and the demand is in Manaus. There is a logistic challenge to take gas there so that you do not have significant changes coming in and out along the way. So it is possible not only as additional compression, but it's also possible to improve the blend of the gas with a better calorific power. We transport to millions of BTU. There are no studies regarding the improvement of the energy power of the gas that is injected, but you can have the same level of energy with the, we are a regulated system. We could have a public invitation for additional capacity. So additional investment plus the market need. This is a good problem to have. We should have coordinated planning to meet market demands. In the case of Urucu, it was not different. Thank you, Video. Our second question comes from Tiago Noel from Opportunity. He would like you to comment about the long-term sustainability risks because of the verticalization movement of the distributors using a tag bypass. I'm going to separate this answer into two parts. TAG's business is based on long-term contracts, mean of 11 years. These contracts are perfect legal instruments. They should be respected. Also, regarding the law project, But regarding the market design, and we have an expertise of operating outside of Brazil, but projects like this do not make a lot of sense for the market. So TAG is not the main loser here. The market would lose. We wouldn't have a benefit to the market. You would deviate resources in hiring transport, and the others will have to pay for the bill. It's not good for the market. I see the market as an iceberg. There is a false feeling of gain, and then you have the tip above the iceberg, and you go closer to the tip. It's like paying transportation, and you will have a gain. But you will be dependent on a source, and it may not be the best option for purchase in the future. You also depend on operational safety, and if you have a failure at the energy plant, you will pay alone for the infrastructure. And there are other more rational ways to do it. Initially, I would say that TAG is not the one to suffer. It is the market as a whole, the lower part of the iceberg. And if we measure the gas bill, and for me, we have transportation, distribution, these are network structures which do not compete with one another. Transportation is the main pillar. We also have the demand. Those in the group who are interested in governance, for example, in France, they do not produce gas, but they have 32 kilometers in transportation and 22 for distribution. There is an engineering rationale for them to do this. Many associations have realized this, and it doesn't make any sense to verticalize within the state. Transportation does not want to bypass distribution, but it doesn't want to be bypassed either. It doesn't make sense for the market. We believe that it will be increasingly clearer to the market that there is no advantage in having a disintegrated system. I would like to complement. We think that ANP play an essential role in this discussion to encourage the existence and the liquidity in the gas market. It could come in as it could come in to redesign the fees and the incentives that are used by consumers should make sense from an economic point of view. And then making connections compulsory to the mesh. So it makes a lot of sense from an economic point of view that we deal with a transportation network first. ANP should lead this process. It should avoid us to have a disconnected market. We must have also regulatory framework. Your contribution is very important. I would like to highlight a case we have today in Brazil on tax mesh. The Sergipe terminal, it's operating. It won a tender more recently, and the longest timeline was for the construction of the thermoelectric and all of the offshore engineering, which wasn't simple at all, when having a pipeline would be simpler. The gas should be inexpensive for the market, but it's not connected. So we should try to make these connections feasible. It doesn't make for you to have a terminal 20 kilometers from the shore, which is not connected to the system. We have to change the rules. It's not the fault of the investors, let me make it very clear, but we should encourage uh, and this disintegration does not make any sense in other countries. They are surprised by this. It really doesn't make any sense. And once again, I thank ANP for its role, and we understand that the PL will reinforce the reintegration.
Thank you, Ovidio. Thank you, Takanori. A next question, and I would like to make a disclaimer. I am the moderator here, and I haven't been able to pay attention to the answer. So if I repeat a question, I apologize beforehand. The next question comes from Carol from Credit Suisse. Among the requests for access that you mentioned, Ovidio, you mentioned that 2 projects were for investment. If you could give us further details on this, the potential of revenues and capex associated to this. Well, in the case, I believe that the 2 projects that I mentioned refer to the connection of Citygate to the distribution mesh of Bahia Gas, and the other refers to Sergipe. But your question, I think, refers more to the concept. So I will base myself on the emblematic case of Sergipe. I spoke about estimates. As this is a regulated sector, we have to approve the projects at the regulatory agency. And in Sergipe, this would represent an incremental public invitation or call. In the case of Sergipe, I can give you an idea of the magnitude. We're referring to 200, 300 million perhaps. And this for a preliminary phase, and it's simply a forecast. And it needs to go through that regulatory validation before the decision is made to invest. Now, TAG is not going to invest without validating the regulatory process for recognition. And 4 attributes are evaluated. If the investment makes sense for the market, yes, I think we're unanimous in terms of this. The amounts, are they in accordance? And do they have regulatory validation? The remuneration and the temporary allocation, the way it will be allocated. So all of this has to be initially validated, and this will lead us to perhaps having greater confidence in investments, where in a phase of study, the alternatives of routes and environmental aspects. But this is one that makes sense, the expansion of the market, and the compensation or remuneration will come once all of this has been validated in the regulatory agency. Thank you, Ovidio. I think this was the question. It was conceptual. We have a question from Vladimir Pinto from Kiran Capital. Good day. Do you think that the process to define entry and outgoing fees are within what was expected for the pipelines? Well, the new transmission contracts are part of the framework which is in effect, and they will be based on the entry and the output modes. What does change is the transportation contracts that are in effect have a single fee for the TAG mesh, and they're valid only for a segment of the mesh, and these contracts will not be altered. They remain, they are the legacy contracts, and they represent obligations of the Petrobras company, and this has been maintained in the contract. Now, this entry and output facilitates the entry of new agents and this tariff allocation. If I give you a simple example, if we have a call or a public invitation at present, and if We did not require new investments to allow for the entry of new agents into TAG. In this public call, we will verify the market data in an ordained fashion. We will see if we can live with the present day flows that go through the mesh, and if there would be, for this additional volume, well, if the initial volume is 100, if we can add another 10 in terms of volume, theoretically, the TAG revenues would remain the same because they're not making additional investments, and what would be allocated would be part of this revenue. So we continue to receive the 100, and the new agents would receive a fee allocation in those points from that revenue. Now, that process of attribution or allocation depends on a public call where we can test this. There would be no impact on the revenues or guarantees of reception of TAG. But once again, as we mentioned before, the greater the volume, the better the fee allocation. The revenues allowed because of the investment made, and the necessary expenses for maintenance and alteration of the asset. Thank you once again, Ovidio. The next questions come from Pedro Manfredini from Goldman Sachs regarding additional investments in the TAG mesh. Once again, this is a conceptual question, and I think it's positive for the market to become updated in terms of this. Whatever comes through new bids or tenders in the TAG mesh. Now, this also happens in energy transmission when you speak about CAPEX and new auctions. Now, if I understood the question, these are investments that relate to the new market opening, and they, of course, would relate to maintenance and integrity of the operations. New investments, once again connected to the market opening, will have to go through that regulatory validation process. What we stand for is that the transporter, the transmission, should anticipate this by planning with the regulator, and for those investors that have a systemic gain. For example, if we're speaking about new supply, when you connect a new supply to the system, it benefits not only those who are buying or purchasing. The fact that you're generating an alternative for the market, even if you don't buy from that source, there will be a gain. It will enable you better negotiations with your present supplier. So for those investments that have a systemic gain, based on references that we have from other markets, you can ask the regulator to include this in your base without necessarily having that public call. Now, more timely investments would have to go through that public invitation to validate the investment. So there's a cycle of proposals, and well, there is what happens in the market as well, which was the case of Bahia Gas, that has investments in their receiving side, and they need a connection. So all of the investments are driven by the market, and of course there could be investments driven by the transporter or transmission. All have to go through the regulating agency. Thank you, Ovidio. We have several other questions. The next is from Gabriel Francisco from XP Investments. If you could speak about the regulation of ANP, if it is sufficiently robust to justify investments in their base. I think we have spoken about this. Perhaps you would like to comment on this? My understanding is that, yes, of course, we're going to go through a reinforcement and enhancement process for the approval of the new PLNL cycle. We have to have this revision and enhancement of the new instruments, and ANP has a regulatory agenda that is submitted to public consultation as well. And of course, the enhancements will be done. We're taking the sector out of that inertia, but we do have a very good asset base, and the consensus that we have is that we should go towards a market opening. This will be sustainable, and of course, the market will continue to be more open. Ovidio, let us go on to the next question. I'd like to ask Satamini. There's a question that perhaps he can respond to. In truth, there are two questions. Who would be responsible for the additional investments in TAG? Would it be TAG itself, or will there be the need for other contributions? Well, in principle, when we speak about increments in the transmission platform or storage of gas, as this is regulated, it makes sense for all of this to be done within TAG. It's part of the business to transport and store gas within that regulated environment. The other question, Rafael, would you please repeat it? It was a combo, both questions related about additional capex and who would be responsible for that. Well, in the case of investment, it should come from its own cash generation. If it needs resources from third parties, it could be through a debt or a capital call. But normally this would be done with the company's own cash generation. Thank you, Satamini. A new question. Ovidio, if you could speak about the maximum capacity for the expansion of pipelines, which are the factors that you consider to set forth the ability for the expansion besides the market, evidently? Well, the market is the main factor in this case, but the maximum capacity, and if you allow me, I will simplify this and make a disclaimer. It depends on the market itself. The pipelines have a technical aspect. They go through a static session in an elevator, for example, where we have 10 people, each weighing 80 kilos. The capacity is 800 kilos. It can take 800 kilos or 8,000 kilos. If some people get down and other people enter, we will reach those 8,000 kilos during the movement of the elevator. And the ability of movement in a pipeline also depends on the market, where the withdrawals are and where the injections are made. Some scenarios are more positive, others are not. Now, if you ask for the maximum capacity of TAG, in some segments, it could be 4 or 5 million cubic meters additionally. And in others, if we put 200 or 300 additional cubic meters, this combination may not be feasible. If the market demands it, if we have to make investment, it is our business. We will do it. Obviously, all the other investments will relate to the integrity of the asset, and will have to guarantee that the service is carried out with operational efficiency and without any interruptions. And TAG's track records have been very positive. I don't know if this has responded to the question, but I think the main factor, once again, goes back to the market. Yes. Thank you, Ovidio. With this, we would like to end the question and answer session for the second panel. And if you wish, if anybody would like to say any closing remarks, please do so. Yes, if I could say something here, if you allow me. Yes, please, Takanori. My summary and my message is that we're constantly searching for the market development, the hydroelectrical market, a market that is more transparent, with that guarantee for free access and an endless search for economic efficiency. This will generate longevity, a return on investment, and of course, a good provision. Yes, Takamori, this is what it is all about. And every once in a while, we will create situations that will reduce our market reserve as generators. We understand that the business is not sustainable based on subsidies and market reserves. And this has been our main goal, to seek for more liquid, more transparent markets ever more. To act in that type of market, we have to get ready with process efficiency measures, with training of personnel, and of course, we have to offer the best to society. Thank you for your presentations, Rafael. With this, therefore, we will end the question and answer session. We will go on to another 10-minute break. Thank you very much.
Como hino à alegria, eu crio. Como uma ode à vida, ilumino. Eu inspiro. Como uma sinfonia, eu afino. Respiro. Desacelero. Como uma nota que ressoa ao vento, que cai no chão, eu alimento, produzo a sua energia. Em harmonia, eu corro e abraço a sua vida. A ENGIE, maior empresa privada de energia do Brasil, se inspira na minha força para gerar e transmitir energia, transportar gás natural e oferecer soluções energéticas. Unimos esforços e criamos parcerias para um planeta mais sustentável. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Na vida, tudo tem começo, tudo tem fim. Mas no meio, tem que ter movimento. Em um momento como esse, em que um simples sair de casa é um risco, em que um descuido vira perigo, outros fazem por nós. Da semente que germina no campo, à entrega cuidadosa que chega à nossa porta, milhões de brasileiros diariamente doam o seu trabalho para que a gente possa, com proteção, seguir a vida. Do agricultor ao caminhoneiro, do frentista ao balconista, a toda essa gente que não deixa a roda parar de girar, nosso muito obrigado por esse movimento. Use máscaras, lave as mãos e agradeça. ENGIE, vamos além da energia. Para uns o copo está meio cheio, para outros meio vazio. Mas não dá para negar que, mesmo no meio dessa pandemia, das inúmeras dificuldades, muita gente fez a diferença. Vizinhos juntaram cestas básicas, entidades reuniram doações, universidades desenvolveram respiradores, empresas doaram hospitais. E de repente, aquela generosidade do dia a dia, daquela vizinha que empresta uma xícara de açúcar, transforma-se em um novo caminho. E isso une. E mais que enxergar meio cheio ou meio vazio, a gente está aprendendo, juntos, a encher o copo. Use máscaras, lave as mãos e agradeça. ENGIE, vamos além da energia. Nunca o mundo precisou tanto de cuidado. Aquele cuidado quase maternal de insistir para levar o guarda-chuva transformou-se em colocar a máscara. Aquele cuidado de lavar as mãos antes do almoço virou lavar as mãos todas as horas. E nesse mundo cheio de cuidados, aqueles que cuidam silenciosamente e arriscam-se para que ninguém sofra. Um cuidado gigantesco, mas que, infelizmente, quase ninguém vê. Então, sabe qual é o nome de quem cuida da gente e a gente não vê? Anjo. Esse é o nosso agradecimento e respeito a todos os profissionais de saúde, esses anjos que cuidam diariamente para que a gente fique bem. Use máscaras, lave as mãos e agradeça. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Está tomando uma dimensão muito grande esse projeto, sabe? Realmente é um projeto transformador. Trazer conhecimento para a escola, traz pertencimento aos alunos. Fala, opa, é uma escola diferenciada.
A ENGIE nos ajudou muito e trouxe um efeito muito positivo dentro do projeto Gente e também dentro da sociedade.
E a gente agradece muito a ENGIE o investimento que eles fizeram aqui por acreditarem que essa ferramenta aqui iria ajudar tanto assim, não só Quedas, mas toda a região aqui no nosso entorno.
A ENGIE já foi parceira nossa, sentindo a necessidade de fazer a reforma dessa estrutura, que não é fácil pelo tamanho, fazer a manutenção, que com certeza estão fazendo a diferença no mundo.
Esse espaço do Centro Cultural, ele traz uma comodidade para a comunidade, que é colocar esses instrumentos num lugar só.
O Taekwondo começou aqui em Saudade do Iguaçu há 13 anos, né? Fui abençoado aí por ter empresas como a ENGIE, né, tão importantes assim, que cruzaram o nosso caminho e nos deram assim essa oportunidade de proporcionar às crianças e adolescentes algo que a gente não teve e que a gente julga tão importante, né, para o crescimento deles como atleta e como pessoa.
E hoje eu tô aí há 6 anos na seleção brasileira, eu tenho 21 ouros internacionais, eu tenho 7 medalhas internacionais, então eu me vejo daqui a 4 anos numa Olimpíada.
São 13 anos que eu estou junto com a ENGIE, desenvolvendo ações em prol da responsabilidade social, da sustentabilidade. Eu agradeço todo dia.
O projeto Hospital Digital nos permite investimentos em tecnologia, inovação, imprescindíveis para que o Pequeno Príncipe possa fazer mais, melhor, tocar mais pessoas e ter resultados abrangendo todo o Brasil.
Visitando os agricultores, percebemos que a proteção de fontes seria um projeto que faria a diferença.
No total, foram 350 nascentes protegidas com esse projeto em parceria com a ENGIE.
Muitas famílias que foram beneficiadas com esse projeto e não teria condição, acho, de comprar o material, de fazer a proteção que hoje tem ali, né?
De hoje a gente analisa e vê, assim, o resultado da proteção de fonte, que a água é bem mais limpa.
Não tem nem palavra, né? Sem água nós não somos nada.
É um projeto que segue, né, e que não para. A gente prova isso, né? O mais importante é saber que nossas crianças estão recebendo uma água de qualidade, né? A nossa família está recebendo uma água de maior qualidade, não somente na cidade, mas também no interior. Projeto que é uma planta de vários anos atrás e que segue para o futuro.
ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Uma uma coisa aprendemos este ano: essencial são as pessoas e o que faz do mundo um lugar melhor para elas. A ENGIE, a maior empresa privada de energia do Brasil, trabalha nessa transformação, buscando fontes renováveis e ajudando empresas e cidades a consumirem menos. Este é o caminho para uma sociedade mais consciente. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Para cada pessoa existe um mundo girando à sua volta. E esses mundos não são medidos por metros ou quilômetros quadrados, muito menos limitados por fronteiras. São mundos próprios, do tamanho da prioridade e do sonho de cada um. E a ENGIE ajuda a girar muitos desses mundos, com incentivo e patrocínios de projetos socioambientais que despertam emoções e fazem a diferença na vida de todos que são beneficiados com esses projetos. Por trás de toda a emoção que a Camerata Florianópolis desperta em suas apresentações, está a nossa energia. Investir na cultura e no poder da música é acreditar que a trilha sonora das nossas vidas merece muitos aplausos. A nossa energia está por trás da disciplina, da garra e do suor das meninas do Leoas da Serra, time de futsal feminino campeão mundial. Um projeto social para mulheres e meninas guerreiras, vencedoras na vida. Investir no esporte é ver a nossa energia gerar sorrisos, gols e muitas vitórias. Toda a beleza, elegância e emoção da Escola do Teatro Bolshoi no Brasil, a única fora da Rússia, tem a nossa energia. Apoiar a cultura é acreditar que a magia que vem dos palcos tem o poder de transformar e encantar o mundo. Fomentar a cultura e o desenvolvimento das comunidades onde está inserida é ir além da energia. Por isso, a ENGIE acredita e incentiva projetos como os Centros de Cultura de Alto Bela Vista, de Capivari de Baixo e de Concórdia, que proporcionam um mundo de possibilidades, gerando orgulho a todos que estão à sua volta. Com o apoio ao Parque Estadual Fritz Plaumann e ao Parque Encantos do Sul, a ENGIE mostra que se preocupa com o futuro e o meio ambiente, proporcionando momentos de lazer e gerando sorrisos. Pensar no futuro é pensar no que está à nossa volta. E essa é a energia da ENGIE, uma energia que ajuda a girar o mundo da Marcela, o mundo do João, o mundo da Gabriela. ENGIE, vamos além da energia.
Ok, pessoal.
Very well. We're now going to go on to our third and last panel, Digital Transformation, Progress and Opportunities. As we mentioned in this event, we have made great strides in security in the digital world, thanks to the investments that we were making in 3 years to digitize our operations. Now, all of these digital aspects have fit in perfectly with our workers who have been working remotely in a very efficient way. But they also offer solutions that extend to the commercial area and e-commerce. And recently we launched new products, and we're the only company with a fully digital platform for energy. So more than isolated projects, what we tried to do was to work with innovation and the transformation of our businesses, and to update you on this trajectory in digital transformation and the impact on our business, going through the strides. I would like to invite our Chief Administrative Officer, Luciana Navarrete, to begin the panel. We will then have Gabriel Mann, Chief Commercialization Officer, and Marcos Keller, Chief Regulation and Market Officer, who will speak about the evolution in this area. Luciana, can I give you the floor? Yes, thank you, Satamini. A good day to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, speaking about the digitization process at ENGIE Energia Brasil. Well, this is a continuous process that has been accentuated in the last 3 years with a strategic plan for digital transformation. It is made up of drivers and initiatives, and it has been built in collaboration with several areas of the company. Our digitization process is based on 3 pillars: people, where we speak about training and a mindset change; processes, that is all about assessment and a constant enhancement in processes; and of course, technology, where we speak about initiatives that are put in place aligned with the business needs. During the pandemic, we were able to see how correct our decisions were in the past in terms of digitization. Our increase in mobility and a decrease in the use of paperwork have allowed us to move very quickly and transparently to home offices, and we were able to maintain all of our operations working with safety and efficiency. Our focus is to implement solutions that will add something to the business, increasing revenues, mitigating risks, and cutting down on costs. And of course, this includes a stage of analysis and process enhancement so that we can guarantee the best solution for everybody. I would like to share with you some examples that represent initiatives that were put in place during 2020. We enhanced our predictive tools at the plants through the use of machine learning, algorithms, and artificial intelligence, enabling us to forecast failures and decreasing downtime. We also had an experimental process that uses Google ILAS to work on the maintenance of plants. We also use full process automation and similar technologies to automate back office financial and administrative tasks, generating results such as the automation of the analysis and accounting process that is done routinely. And we had the execution time decreased by 73%. It's also important to highlight the process of preparation for digital implementation. This went through the commercialization part, the preparation, and all of this will come in full force in 2021. I would like to invite Marcos Keller to further explain this. Good morning, Luciana and everybody. We have been transforming the company in the last few years, especially when it comes to the hourly price. And we have been working on this since 2018, using a combination of technology with applied mathematics. And we have worked on methodologies, tools, processes, once again to begin working in that new reality that will begin in 2021. All of our energy plants have already been opened up in terms of this hourly price. We have fully automized projects for the system, and this enables us to work with hourly forecasts and optimize the maintenance processes as well. And another very important aspect is the use of techniques, mathematics, and technology to map the consumption patterns per segment in the economy. And once we have this mapping of consumption per segment, we are able to have a clear view of the risks that are associated to that segment. And for several months already, we have been working with a customized pricing based on the risk of each customer. With each new sale, we assess the consumption profile. We analyze when we will have a risk, and we price this once again in a highly individualized fashion. And this risk could, of course, appear, it could end up being a discount or something similar. Now, we have no knowledge of any other agent working at this level or at this stage. So we have significant details that go from our generation activity all the way to consumption. And we are ready for this new reality in terms of hourly price. Once again, I return the floor to you, Luciana, to speak about our digitation and to explain what else we did in terms of digitation. It's very important to speak about the creation of Energy Place, which is our energy e-commerce. And to speak about this initiative in greater detail, I would like to give the floor to Gabriel Mann, our commercialization officer. Gabriel, if you could unmute yourself, please. I do apologize. Thank you, Luciana, and thank you for enabling me to speak more about the platform. Good morning to all. And ENGIE last year, for those who were able to accompany inside ENGIE, I presented the go-to-market project, which is a project to transform our business and prepare the company for a greater market opening, which is at the doorstep, and enabling us to act more among smaller customers in the retail and small wholesale market. This project has a very strong pillar in digital transformation, not only business transformation, but also digital transformation. And Energy Place is one of the deliverables of this transformation. And before I speak about the platform, I would like to share with you a very short video, 30 seconds or a minute, speaking about the platform, and then I will make further.
So you've seen that the proposal for Energy Place is our digital platform for us to be closer and closer to our clients and to the energy managers. Many of them have this manager. but also for those who are just potential clients and also the market. This platform is evolving on a constant basis. We have version 1. We were working, thinking of the different additional functionalities. And just as in any digital platform, it's evolving continuously. Basically, the platform has two environments. It has a portal for our clients. When they come in, they have access to the information of contracts with us, volume, deadlines, prices, flexibility, consumption, payment receipt, the guarantees they have. Everything is included in the portal. Also, they can enter information of what must be delivered throughout the contract. And just just as a comment, they can input data directly on the platform, and that will go directly to our corporate systems, and you avoid receiving data from clients, and our internal process is digitalized. There's also a possibility to interact digitally with our relationship teams. There's another environment, a commercialization environment for our clients, and also for those who are not ENGIE clients. They can access our products, request quotes, information, and in the case of some products, they can buy these products 100% digitally. For example, they will have access to customized products. They will have access to the Economisa project that we launched this year. It is a project for those clients who are in the captive market and want to migrate to the free market. And the short-term product, which is totally digital and has to do with the different laws, the company that is interested goes in the platform. They will have to sign up, of course. They insert the volume they need, choose the type of energy, whether it's conventional or subsidized, and then they put it in the cart. Once they conclude the purchase, they pay the invoice, and automatically the energy hired is already registered in the CCR. It is 100% digital. Nobody at ENGIE participates in this process. It is all integrated digitally. And at the platform, we also have our green product with the different certificates. We have the IREX, the NDREX, our contract to provide renewable energy with a guarantee of origin. And then there's another project that was developed 2 years ago to support our clients in the decarbonization process. This is aligned to our controller's strategy and also to our ESG practices. And Luciana will talk a little bit more about this with you later, and I turn over to Luciana now. Well, thank you, Gabriel. So we're now going to talk about social responsibility. In this era of pandemic, a lot of our actions in terms of social responsibility were aimed at fighting COVID. I would like you to put the first slide on the screen. we can see a summary of the evolution of our actions to fight COVID-19 throughout the pandemic. So initially, we carried out emergency actions focusing on the short term. We have an amount of 7 million BRLs in 14 municipalities in the different states that we work at, and they were focusing on PPEs, basic staple, and other emergency issues. But then, as the pandemic went on, we realized it wasn't enough. We had to conceive, in addition to the short-term actions, we should conceive actions for the mid and long term to generate income, to somehow be able to offer opportunities for those who were affected by the pandemic and became quite vulnerable. With that, we launched a program called Women in Our Neighborhood. It's dedicated to generating income for these women in the municipalities we work at. It was a fortunate initiative. The community in general responded well. We had 287 projects that were enrolled, 28 initiatives were awarded, and we had 270,000 BRLs dedicated to that. There was an impact in the communities we work at, and this is just a summary of what we did in terms of social responsibility, specifically focusing on fighting the pandemic. And still talking about social responsibility, in the next slide, you can see that even in this adverse scenario, we kept our social responsibility actions. We continued supporting 347 projects so far, so that these projects could be maintained. We had some initiatives that were shared by YouTube so that these projects could live throughout the pandemic. We invested 207 BRLs, and you can see in the graph that we had a large amount of cultural projects. I highlight above all the culture centers, and in the videos that we showed in the breaks, you saw some images of the culture center. We have 3 that are being built, and the others are already operating. We have also projects dedicated to children and teenagers to educate on environmental protection. They're all dedicated to children and adolescents. And we also offer complementary activities such as music, dance, among others. Another highlight is an institute in the state of Maranhão. We also have investments in different projects for the elderly in different locations. And we also have projects to encourage sports activities. In the state of Santa Catarina, we have a project. It also showed during the break. It's an indoor female soccer project for children and adolescents who are or who live in vulnerable conditions in those neighborhoods. Furthermore, we have expanded our activities by means of partnerships with clients and providers. That enables us to further multiply our actions, both in the projects that we already work at and our own projects. And now, talking a little bit about social responsibility, we have actions dedicated to environmental protection. Can we move on to the next slide? Here you can see some figures. We have over 30 million that were invested in these programs to support us with the licensing. So we have water quality, monitoring and control of fauna, environmental recovery, monitoring for compliance of different rules. And in addition to that, we have approved over 10 million BRL for projects on innovation. Among them, we have one in the Uruguay River and another one in a partnership with, we also have a project for the recovery of birds surrounding hydroelectric power plants. During this period, we also renewed environmental licenses, totaling a large number of plants. With that, we can see this whole scenario, and it's important to say that all of these actions are closely related to our sustainable development goals. With this, we conclude this panel, and now I turn over to Rafael so that we can have our Q&A session. Thank you, Lou. Our first question comes from João Pimentel from BTG. Gabriel, this question is for you. How do you communicate with Energy Place? I would like to know a little bit of the details. Well, today, Economiza is in our platform. Clients can access it. And as I mentioned before, in the platform, we have some products that are totally digitalized. Economiza is digitalized until part of it where the client comes in, is interested by the product, requests the amount, and requests a quote. We send a quote, and then there's another part of the process with the beginning of the supply. And this is going to be part of a second wave of improvements of the platform with new functionalities, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you, Gabriel. To complement his question, he wants to know what the potential for client migration is. Regarding the release for the free market, well, this is a complex issue. Do you have an idea of the total potential for the market? Because we have some projects that are being discussed. We need to have an idea of exactly what is going to be the opening schedule to be defined in the end. But based on this opening program to be decided by the regulation, we can have an idea of the market, of the potential market, or the total market. Of course, we do not believe that everybody will migrate once the market opens. There will be gradual adherence of the potential consumers. We have worked with some scenarios in terms of the percentage of adherence, but we know that there won't be an instant migration overnight as the opening schedule is defined. And so we do not have a single possible scenario. We have designed optimistic scenarios, pessimistic scenarios, according to the different regulations that are under discussion for the sector. Thank you, Gabriel. We now have a question for Keller. Actually, there are two questions. André Sampaio from Santander and Carol from Credit Suisse about the impact of Período in our resource allocation strategy. Was there a significant impact? Did it lead to any changes in our strategies? More specifically, there was significant impact, but it's not relevant. There are other more important ones in terms of changes of the rules And in response to your question, Rafael, in our strategy for the rest of the year, the impact is lower. There is some impact, but it's not very marked. It's not very marked. Thank you, Keller. We have a question for Lou now. Diego, our physical person investor, asks, what is Engie's expectation for the Internet of Things? Is there an expectation for this to evolve? Well, thank you for the question, Rafael. The Internet of Things is a very broad issue. Today, for example, whenever you talk about automation in general, I can say that we already have a lot being done at Engie using the same technology. So when you think of the Internet of Things in terms of a refrigerator, household appliances that are interconnected so that we can connect data and then determine consumption standards to generate consumption, well, that's a way to go, but more in terms of the analysis and use of data than in terms of data collection. Wonderful, Lou. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Well, with this, we close. We do not have any other questions. And so I turn over to Sarameni for his final remarks. Sarameni. Well, thank you, Rafael. Perhaps I could use part of Luciana's answer. We do have a lot of automation and Internet of Things happening on our day-to-day. Perhaps this is not perceptible. It is more operational. For us to use communication among the different machines, we have had an increasing concern to modernize our operations efficiently. We now conclude this edition of our ENGIE 2020. I hope that we have been able to clarify concerns, shown you the initiatives made by the company to align with the group's strategy and to modernize. And I would like to say that we are optimistic for 2021 to resume growth and with the opportunities that these regulatory changes will bring about. We will be participating in the different auctions and the M&A opportunities, pursuing growth for the company, all is based on responsibility, financial discipline, and providing adequate returns to our investments, and continue delivering an extraordinary performance for our shareholders. This is our expectation. We close this event. I would like to thank you for your participation on behalf of Engie Brazil, and I would also like to wish you a healthy end of year with your respective families. I am optimistic that the vaccine will soon be made available here in Brazil, despite all of the political mess involved in this issue. We continue discussing with our IR team to be able to answer your questions, and we are always available along with our investors so that we can provide the best information possible with as much transparency as possible. My regards.